One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.
Let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to ask you about the sport of lacrosse, which we're a couple weeks deep for both men and women on that front. Maybe more so than in terms of the schedule for men than women, but it is a conversation or a groundswell that we continue to feel, hear, read about throughout the nation. And maybe it's a byproduct a little bit of the head injury conversation with football from the NFL on down. So the two-part question here is, can you see a day when lacrosse is truly ubiquitous across Division I institutions, or nearly ubiquitous? And then what social and sport factors impact lacrosse's growth?
So I'll talk about it, broadly, but certainly I think there's some uniqueness to when you talk about men's lacrosse or women's lacrosse, and I think a lot of that has to do with Title IX and enrollments on various campuses. But I do see a time where it's going to be, what's the definition of ubiquitous? And so I think it will be more ubiquitous than it is currently. To what level it gets, I'm not really sure of that. But I can tell you that, there's been an explosive growth for lacrosse, and I think for a number of reasons. One of which, you mentioned with the concerns about concussions and head injuries and brain injury from football. I think lacrosse is also a sport that has some basketball principles, has some soccer principles, and as kids, maybe like basketball, but they don't have the height or the lateral quickness. Maybe their bodies are built more for a sport like lacrosse versus basketball, or as the sport is growing and numbers for trying out for a soccer team are such that earlier they're being exposed to lacrosse. And so I think those are reasons why the sport of lacrosse is growing. I think it's an exciting sport. I think it's this is my perspective. As much as I love baseball, one of the things baseball struggles with is the length of time. And
Yep.
Even if you talk to parents, if you talk to fans of lacrosse, people feel like they can get in and get out. It's 2 hours, and it's exciting and it's fast paced. Once those who don't understand the sport understand the rules and the principles and the strategies, they really take to it. And so you saw really it was, on the East Coast, and it started to, I think skip over the Midwest to the West Coast, and now it's starting to grow in the Midwest. And when I was in the Midwest, where we saw the growth was in a lot of the private schools, because there has been a correlation between upper socioeconomic and participation in and interest in lacrosse. But because of a lot of grassroots efforts, now you're starting to see lacrosse be across the continuum of socioeconomic backgrounds and opportunities for all to play lacrosse. And so where the growth is really happening from a collegiate perspective is at Division III, where schools are using it as an enrollment drive.
Sure.
So many institutions, or I should say far more institutions, have majority female enrollment undergraduate versus male. And so a way to grow their male enrollment, it isn't a roster size as football, but it's a pretty large roster size. And if you're at a place that's non-scholarship, you can, bring 30 to 40 to 45 males into your institution with the sport of lacrosse. And I think at the Division I institution, what is keeping it from growing even more is that same challenge, is that the schools that have football that offer scholarships and how Title IX factors in, it's tough for them to add additional men's sports. But on the opposite end, you see that's where it's being added on the women's side, as institutions are challenged with Title IX and looking at what sports make sense and where, they do interest surveys of kids coming out of high school in terms of what sports they play and they would want to have offered at at the institution, lacrosse is one of those that you see more and more as one that is leading the pack on the interest surveys, and so schools are adding it. So, I think it's gonna continue to expand. Will it expand? The definition of quicker. There are some resource challenges and some Title IX challenges that I think at the Division I level are going to keep a growth maybe a little more modest, but certainly there is a lot of interest in the sport.
So I asked Tim Leonard this same question, and of course you and Towson are in the same marketplace. I asked him about how you carve out a niche in a large metropolitan area, multiple pro sport opportunities, multiple collegiate opportunities, entertainment opportunities as well. Do you guys internally, when you think about marketing the brand of UMBC and you think about selling tickets, do you look specifically at what Towson is doing or what Coppin's doing or Morgan's doing, any of these in terms of how do we create kind of our unique value proposition? Is that an annual thing you guys look at in comparison to your peers there in the marketplace?
A little bit. We talk, and Jim Paquette and Tim Leonard and I, we all know each other, and I think there's a great deal of respect, across the continuum that we have for each other. And as much as we have similar situations, our institutions are different and in different locations, and history and tradition that's already present, impacts certain things that we do. But I'll say specifically for us, and I think to some degree this affects my colleagues, I always say we don't compete with the Ravens. We don't compete with the Orioles. Somebody's not saying, wow, we're either going to get season tickets for the Ravens or for UMBC basketball. We're not at a price point that most people are going to have to make a decision of one or the other. What we compete with is dinner and a movie. And somebody said to me the other day, now the trend is these places where you go and you like, I don't call it paint by numbers, but you paint and maybe
Sure.
have adult beverages, and that we're competing with those types of things. So we are at a price point that is not a barrier to entry, really. What is more of a concern for us is discretionary time. And so because of that price point, discretionary money usually isn't an issue. It's people walking away, hopefully not saying, that's 2 hours of my life I'll never get back. And so how do we create an environment, and looking to that, for those that are old enough, the Bill Beck model from baseball and that minor league feel, how do we make our games an event that will be attractive to a larger cross-section of individuals? And so if there's a percentage of people walking out of our basketball game, and if somebody were to poll them and say, do you remember the score? If they didn't remember the score, but they knew that we won, and they say that they really had a great time, that's okay. And so what we've been looking to do in terms of marketing and building is how can we have other types of things like, whether it's book signings by authors, whether it's, doing those, do a painting thing prior to the game, but gets people to stay for the game, having concerts with local acts that people are interested in. It's that minor league feel to say, yes, we want people to really come because of our team and because it's exciting and hopefully because they win more than they lose. But we also want to make it a fun event in that. And so what we're competing with is people who are going to go to dinner and a movie, people who are going to do something else socially at a similar price point, if that makes sense. And so, what works for us that doesn't work for other people that we have found here with our constituency is, from a basketball perspective and even lacrosse, playing midday, because as we look at our demographics, our fan base is probably between the majority between 30 and 50 or 55, and they have kids that are involved in activities. And so, activities are done in the morning, and they want to have opportunities to have, social time in the evening. And so what helps us by playing in the middle of the day or on a Sunday is that they can take care of all their personal obligations and then still have time to support the Retrievers. Whereas if we are playing, consistently on the weeknights at 7 p.m., we're competing even more directly with some of those other social opportunities. And so, that's what works for us. It may not work. That wasn't what worked for me when I was in Kansas City. So, as the former chief of staff, Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. Well, I think that even happens in Baltimore. What happens with us is local to some degree, even though thousands of miles away, and what Tim does there is somewhat local with his constituency, and you figure out what is going to put you in the best possible position to be successful.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.